You are never taught how to build quality software by Florian Bellman. Have you ever been in on a software project that is missing vital quality assurance measures? Yep, yep, I think I have. You are not alone. This happens to a mind blowing amount of companies and projects, even if they know that there's this thing called QA and we should do it. All efforts typically result in the big QA sprint right before the release. Stressful times that only make the software barely work. All of this chaos repeats in the next cycle, of course. No improvements. Yeah, that's fair. This happens. This has happened to me. Basically, any big deploy, software deploy, there's a whole sprint of devs testing. I have never been on a team with an actual QA or with a like QA team to go pass things off to. Usually it's just us testing internally, and then we do a UAT session with the users, and then from there, the users will identify any fixes that we need to make, and then from there, we will just deploy the software. And if it has bugs in it, we remediate the bugs. But it's really on the UAT testers at that point and the departments on whether or not there are issues with the software. We already did all of our testing that we could think of, unit, integration, manual, all that. They didn't. So we'll see. We'll see where this goes. So what uni teaches you. The thing is, if you study computer science, you don't learn how to ensure quality standards in software. Most of the time is spent on algorithmic how a computer works, the history of some languages, concepts, etc. In addition, at least in my studies, there was a semester about project management approaches and Scrum, all of which is great, but QA is missing completely. Okay, I had an additional step here in university, and that was around we did design patterns, and that was extremely valuable. There was some unit testing involved in the project, not the project management, but there was some software engineering classes as well, and that's where we did some of our testing. I remember one of my professors said, "When you write bugs, people die. People could die." It's like that's really intense, man. I mean, most of us are writing websites with React and JavaScript. None of us are going to be programming a fighter jet or anything like that. But I mean, that's where he came from. So but anyway, neglecting QA is a shame because 90% plus of all students work in a company context after they finish their degree. It will be necessary to deliver software without bugs on time. Oh, uh, uh, okay. I'm not sure if I agree with that, but we'll see. How companies deliver barely on time. I've seen it countless times. QA standards and measures are the ones to be cut out of projects because of budget reasons first. It's oftentimes planned during the end of the project. But if development takes longer, which it often does, or scope creep comes in, which always happens, there's not enough time for QA anymore. We end up with an absolute minimum of unstructured testing and ship a digital house of cards with brittle walls. Okay. Release testing, testing, testing. Yeah, that does track. I mean that's how it goes as we're adding on. I mean, you test more and more in order to avoid regression tests unless you can automate all that testing, which is the ideal. You want to automate all of those tests. So, um, in some companies or teams, there's a certain QA standard. There are certain QA standards in place. Commonly, it's a senior member of a team who is enforcing them for the rest of the group. Most likely, they learned the hard way that without QA, everything will just become so much harder along the way. Unfortunately, even having standards in place is not enough. It happens time and again that teams simply write tests to satisfy project management metrics. I've never had to do this. I guess it's just the fact that I work in a smaller company, but I've never had a project manager demand that I write tests for certain use cases. I mean, it probably should happen. Like, I mean, I guess that would probably be the ideal that they define the acceptance criteria, uh, but I get what he's saying. You end up gaming the system. You end up making the tests pass, even if it isn't a great experience for the user. How to get the hamster How to get out of the hamster wheel. It took me years to build the experience and confidence to speak up about missing QA measures in projects. Arguing with managers, living through crunch time around releases, dealing with failing production systems, and looking for missing monitoring, it's not fun. The situations are similar for other improvements of the code base or project which are not directly visible to managers, like refactorings, for example. Refactoring should happen as tech debt later, or as part of a feature ad. Like you shouldn't be refactoring before right before a release. That's not a good idea. You're trying to get something an MVP out the door, or an MVP for a feature out the door. I don't think you should be doing refactoring in the situation in the release cadence like he's talking about here. But let's read on. But for QA, it was always particularly difficult because if we didn't implement any measures, we also never learned how to do it properly. I like this. This is funny. This is pretty great. This is exactly what that situation is like. I agree. Um, Only speaking up and raising the discussion again and again will help to find the first steps out of the hamster wheel. Okay. Sure, unless your manager actually listens to you. Speak about money. At some point, I realized I wasn't using the right arguments either. Ooh, yes, you have to frame things about costs and money. You can't make these arguments about just writing clean, maintainable code. You have to show the people up top this solves X problem that saves us X money or makes us X amount of money. You can't come with like programming um, nebulous concepts to management. They won't go for that unless it is a software company that you're working for. But anyway, I digress. Explaining that the software will be more stable or make maintenance much easier is not palpable for someone who doesn't work in the code base themselves. We need to speak about money. As developers, we need to speak about costs of not doing QA. Yeah, I agree. I agree. There is cost of not doing QA. The question I ask is, at what point does the cost of not doing QA outweigh the benefit of moving quickly and more cheaply? Um, Remediating bugs after the fact is often cheaper than doing manual QA, and sometimes even automated QA. I don't like 100% code coverage. I mean, it's a great metric, but it doesn't really tell you anything. Um, so I think this goes both ways. It depends. It depends. Um, this is the language of business and managers in general. By now, I always try to frame QA measures with examples like, if we don't do it now, development efforts and therefore also costs will be up 15% in 4 months. Or we need, well, how can you, that's a sort of number right there. I, I, I that's not fair. That's subjective. I mean, it's based on experience, so I mean, it's not entirely unfounded, but it's subjective. So we need to implement unit tests for all features or our release stabilization phases will take longer and longer each time. Directly related to all the features that we build because we need to test all side effects manually each time. This will result in making less progress each release. Yes, this part is true. And you can try to convey that if you want to stop regression. Well, that's a big thing. Like, do you actually want to invest the time to stop regressions, because that's expensive? Sometimes if it's an internal tool, like, it doesn't matter if there's a regression. Like, I mean, it kind of looks bad on the development team at that point, but who cares if they have a regression? They have to come file another bug report versus you spend an entire sprint writing tests. I at that at the scale I'm usually at, which is like internal tools and stuff, I don't know if this makes sense. And I mean, at Fang, probably does, but at like the rest of the world, maybe not. In my experience, this switch helps to bring the point home. In the end, your efforts on this will make everyone's lives better. Not everyone knows it yet, though. It can make things more smooth. It definitely can make things more smooth. Spending more time testing will make your releases smoother. Minimal effective dose. To be realistic, it's important not to over engineer QA measures with a big upfront investment. I mean, it's important to not over engineer QA measures in general, I think. Um, we shouldn't block process of the project as a whole, and neither will we get the necessary buy-in from all stakeholders with this approach. I suggest always to look for the most vital parts of the application. Normally, there is a certain use case, feature, or something that the whole application is built around. Some core functionality, which must work correctly in order for software to be of value to a customer. Test that. I agree. Test the core functionality. Test the hot paths. Don't test every single little thing. Test the hot paths and test what bugs you get. And then to make sure that you don't have regressions, if you want to invest in that. Come up with measures and ways to ensure that they are always working as expected. I like the term minimal effective dose, or MED, the smallest dose that will produce the desired outcome. So, a more medical version of minimal viable product? But in QA, this can be a manual testing plan, automated tests in the pipeline, or something different. It's the right place to start. If the core features are ensured, you can gradually expand stability, i.e., for all new features, you add a unit test. I mean, again, depends. Additionally, think about the sources of information that you can't control, like external APIs or user inputs. Find ways to validate them, as well as these are more obvious places in which your software can crash because of misuse. Iterate and increment, also on QA. Okay. Things I look out for. For each new project that I start or join, I look out for a QA concept. How small it might be, the team should have thought about it. What are we shipping? What do we need to ensure is working? How do we do that? Out of which measures do we deliberately opt out, and why? Okay, this last one I think is fair. Calling out the things with your stakeholders that you're skipping. Like, you could be doing X and we're going to do Y. Like, you could be doing all these things, but you don't have to necessarily. Having a written document about this, plus perhaps a testing plan, is a great foundation on which software can progress. It shows that we as a team thought about how we proceed. Again, thinking in terms of MED. Additionally, I suggest to review the chosen approaches regularly, i.e., once a quarter. When writing new code, I am not using TDD. Cool. I don't think TDD works real well. But I strongly recommend writing tests as you write to the software. Yeah, that's usually good. I like to write tests as I write the software, especially if I'm writing something super complex. I like to write tests for the pieces that I know I won't run later, but I want to know that they run now. And I want to know that I don't break them later. So it's the right moment to shine to write the test. If you write the test as you implement the feature, you have the benefit that your code has to be structured in a way that's actually testable. This is a big thing in C Sharp. In ASP.NET Core and C Sharp in general, there's an issue where it's hard to test things without or it's hard to mock things without interfaces on top of them. So often you have to write every service, every class that's a dependency, everything has to have an interface on top of it. And you find that out for the first time when you're testing your code as you're writing it, usually. Um, so I think it's a good idea to write some tests, testing your hot path as you're writing code, but you don't. I don't think full blown TDD is ever called for. It's really hard. It's just hard, and not usually worth the pain. Um, so writing tests for existing software often reveals that a given code is way too interdependent or that single responsibility principles have been violated. Through the tests, you described that you understood the desired behavior and made sure everything worked as expected to. It's even a form of code documentation, if you will. Yes, I do think tests can document your code, and I think that's a good thing. Especially if you're a library, tests are a great way to document your code. All right, project benefits. Work hours spent without QA measures, with QA measures, project progress. Sometimes it depends. I don't I haven't experienced this kind of curve. Like maybe it's steeper. I have experienced that, but exponential. Like maybe it follows this path until it hits a point and then it starts moving up. But I don't think it's exponential. I don't think that's quite representative of the situation, at least in my experience. But I don't know. When you speak up, people around you realize that you care about the project. Raising discussions around quality and suggesting possible solutions even extends your reach as a developer. That's fair. Um, Saying that you want to avoid bugs and write better software does show people that you care. It can benefit you personally as well as the project. Quality of life for developers and managers will increase. It certainly will be noticed. Only with QA measures can a project grow at a healthy pace. Not necessarily. Okay. Um, Charging projects for the better. Are you ready? Are you already using QA measures in your project, or is everything super brittle? Do you want to expand your developer skills? Become somewhere one to be known for writing quality software. Start small. Think about the MED in your project, the med in your project. Take ownership and be the voice in your team to change for the better. Not everyone needs to be a QA ambassador, but you can teach the people around you. The approach is necessary by leading by example. Spark the discussion. I think this last sentence, spark the discussion. This is fair. I think this is right. I think ultimately this all, like everything here, it depends. It really depends. It depends on the size of your team. It depends on, are you a product, or are you a money sink? Are you a money generator in your company? Are you working on internal tools? Are you working on project or products that your company is selling? All these things have to be taken into account before you decide if the QA measures you're taking are worth it. Sometimes it's not. Uh, in the case of smaller companies where people are writing internal tools, kind of like what I do, it's not worth it. It's really not necessarily worth it to have a full blown QA process and have. And I also think putting metrics on QA can be dangerous, especially things like unit test code coverage. I think that can be abused and gamed, and it won't tell you anything really. Um, and turns into this horrible thing of where like you just figure out how like you end up deleting tests to make the code coverage work out better in your favor, or writing stupid tests to make the code coverage work out better. It doesn't it's not representative of what exactly you'll be doing um in the software, and then testing that at the same time. Like that doesn't represent that. So I ultimately I think it depends. I just think it depends. All right, if you like this video, please hit the subscribe button for more content like this. If you want to see me record these live, I do it on 7. I do coding and this at like 7 p.m. Pacific time. And all right, have a good one.